Hello everybody and welcome back to the free online woodworking school where we aim to take your woodworking skills to the next level. In today's video we're going to begin transferring the tails and cutting the pins for the drawers. Let's get going. Right, so transferring the tails and cutting the pins. So there's going to be elements of this lesson that will be familiar to you because we would have covered it before, but there'll be certain areas that are not. In particular, sizing the back to fit between here while also cutting and marking the pins. It's a bit of a tricky one, so we'll talk you through each step of the way. So we're going to do this all nice and systematically. We'll do all the marking out first and then the cutting later. And we're going to start with the easy one to begin with, which is the lap dovetails at the front of the drawer. And I've got this clamped down upside down on my bench at the moment because I'm going to do the little V-groove technique on the back of these tails to help with aligning it with the pins. And so that marking gauge line on the back is nice and deep, and we're going to come in from the tail side, remember on the back of the tails, not on the front, and we're going to take out a little V-groove. So I'm just angling the chisel in towards that baseline, and just be ever so careful on this fragile bit on the end because remember we need to keep that. Make sure there's no fluff in the corners. And so then we'll get the corresponding parts of the joints lined up. So we've got 2 and 2 here. So let's get them up in there. Little platform from behind, and then we'll just make the pins poke up about 1 millimetre above it. Like that, slide that back, and then because that poked up 1 millimetre, that little V-groove we cut will help lock these into place. Now you can aid this alignment by getting a small spacer and putting it into the groove here and in the groove here. So kind of like that and then like that, but obviously it would be thinner so you could actually lay this on top. And then that's a really good way of locking these tails in side to side, so then you've got both axes sorted. However, I've had a few problems with doing this before where I've accidentally snapped off that fragile bit of material at the side of the tail and then I can't trace around it. Or perhaps more unnoticeably, it deflects it out. Therefore, I trace around a tail that's wider than it should be, cut to that line, and when this bit flexes back in, I've then got a gap there. And so you can certainly use a shim like this if you've got a more substantial bit of material above that groove. However, if it's a little bit flimsy like I've got here, you probably don't want to risk it and you just need to go for the old school method of getting it lined up. And then we're just going to use a chisel on the bottom of the drawer to ensure that that bottom corner is completely flush. The reason I've done it on the bottom here is because I want that groove to line up perfectly. Any misalignment in that and we won't be able to slide the base in. Obviously that goes against what I've scratched here with the face side and face edge. What I should have done really is put the face edge on the bottom of the drawer, but I overlooked it in this stage. So we'll get that flush, and with it locked in the V-groove, you should see that your tails end in line with the line that we scratched on the end grain of the front of the drawer in the last episode. And of course then carefully knife around it. Light pressure and then gradually increase it. And you can see for thin tails like this is why I absolutely love these thin blades. With those lines transferred along the top, carefully square them down to the base lines on the inside of the drawer. Now I'm doing this with a knife because I do plan on putting my chisel in these lines after chopping out loads of the waste. Right, so that's the fronts now marked out. Let's get the back sorted before we think about cutting any of this out. Right, so transferring the back of the sides onto the back of the drawer. This is where a little shim like this that fits your groove perfectly is really handy. So let's get the corresponding component in the vise. That's going to be this one. So we're going to be marking 3 onto 3. What we'll do is get our little shim in our side components, and then we can use that. Let's just bring this up a bit. We can then use that to give us a solid side-to-side lock, and we know the bottom of the back component is going to be in perfect alignment with the top of the groove because it can't go any further because we've got that thing stopping it. So we'll just get something underneath it that will actually fit as a platform. That'll do. And once it's all aligned, we are going to scribe round both sides of both of these dovetails and along this one here that's cut square. There we go. So hopefully you'll be able to see it. We've got one socket there, one socket there, and then we've got this area which will also become waste. So just to run through that again, block in the bottom of the groove, pop that on your supporting block from behind, make sure it's all pressed in at the side here, get it all lined up front to back. You're basically going to be pivoting it by that point. And once it's lined up, hold it down with loads of force and carefully scribe. then we'll obviously scribe those down the front. And with this square one on the end, don't worry about scribing it, just put a little mark on the corner where it intersects with the front face. And then with those square marks, where you marked them on that front face, get your knife in there, pop your ruler up against it, and get the ruler lined up with the other mark on the opposite end. So now the ruler is lined up with that mark and that one, and we'll just carefully scribe a line between them. And now anything past that will now be chopped off. And so hopefully you can see now how that all works. You can see it's resting on the bottom of the drawer down here. We've got the 2 dovetails all lining up, and then that horizontal line all the way across here is now going to be cut away and it will fit within that pin. Confusing, eh? Yeah, even trying to teach it is just but anyway, we're going to start by cutting out all the sockets on the back of the drawer and on the front of the drawer, and then after we've done all that, that's where we will plane down to this line to get it to fit snugly within that pin. And so we'll start clearing out this joint by cutting close to the lines on either side, but leaving about 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter to spare. We'll do that with the old dovetail saw. And then if you've watched this channel long enough, you'll know that I like using a pillar drill to clear out the majority of the waste. And I've set a depth stop for this so it doesn't drill all the way through, which would be catastrophic. And you can of course do this with a normal hand drill, just wrap some masking tape around that drill bit to ensure you don't go through, or get one of those proper drill collars and then get removing the waste. So with some of this material, because it's now short grain, because we drilled in from this way, it should just, he says, it should just break away. There we go, look, it breaks away. Oh, blimey. And so now what I'll do is use a chisel to get back to within 1 millimeter of all the lines around the edge. And then once we've done that, and we've got to 1 millimeter round, I'll give this chisel a sharpen, and then we'll go into the line itself. Right, so we're back to about 1 millimeter away from all the lines on the top. I've quickly sharpened the chisels, so now I'm going to sort out the baseline and chop all the way down to this. Remember, taking off little bits at a time, and just be careful not to hit too hard here. You'll hear the tone of the chisel change when it bottoms out. There, hit any harder than that and you're going to blow right through the front. And there it is. And so I'm using a slightly narrower chisel at the moment to clear out all the choppy bits. And now that I'm close to that line, I'm going to swap to a big wide chisel, because a wide bearing surface like this will give me a straighter line. And so now we're upright in the vise again. I've got a supporting block behind to prevent this back wall from breaking out, and we're going to work back to those lines. Taking off a small amount of material as possible, nice wide chisel so you do it in big long stretches, and yeah, just don't take off too much, don't hit too hard, and take your time. Alright, so I've just assembled the second joint, and what we've got here, that little gap along the end of the tails, is a pretty common problem with lapped dovetails, and is something that my students always experience. This is pretty much always caused by the back wall of the sockets not descending vertically. Instead, it's sloping in like this. So it'll be very difficult to see with a ruler like this, but I can be pretty damn certain that the wall is not descending vertically, and it's instead sloping into the socket. So when the tail goes in, it goes in like that and then gets pushed away. Likewise, it could be a bit of debris there it is. Yeah, I've just seen it. There's a load of debris in the back corners there that will be pushing that tail out and causing that gap. If it doesn't look like it's that back wall, what it could be is a little bump in the bottom of the sockets here, and when it goes in, that bump is pushing on the back of the pin and forcing the entire tail out as well. So ensure that every face on the dovetail joint is perfectly square, with exceptions of the actual dovetails themselves, but everything else should be square. Right, there you go. Front and sides of the drawer are now attached. So if any of that was glossed over for you and you want to go into more detail, don't forget that there is an entire tutorial on how to cut a lap dovetail available in my free online woodworking school, so that will be linked in the supporting resources below. For now, let's move on to the back ones. And so the back pins are just standard through dovetails. It shouldn't be anything new. If you've done the dovetail box project, this should be under your belt. So I'm going to get these cut out, chiseled down to the baseline, and then we'll focus on what happens with this extra bit of material here. Right, so the sockets are all cut, and now we need to remove this excess material up here. So I'm using the bandsaw for this, and I'm going to cut about 1 millimeter away from the line, and we'll plane back to it later. I could use the fence for this, but seeing as I'm not going to be cutting directly to it, I might as well just do it by eye. And then all we do from here is get this on the shooting board and plane back to that line. You could of course do this upright in a vise and plane it from above, but seeing as I've got a shooting board that can accommodate it, I don't have to worry about getting it square. Right. And when you get close to the line, just give it a check just in case. Definitely needs a little bit more off. I reckon that might be it for that side. Not far off there either. So if it needs it on one side more than the other, just take a shaving on that side. Look at that, so that is just catching in there now. So we just need a little bit more trimming in those sockets by the looks of it. So we'll just check all those walls are descending vertically and take out any of the scrappy bits that might be resisting it. Alright, so the only thing we need to do now is put a little relief on the top back corner of the drawer to make it easy to insert and remove from the cabinet carcass. So we've already got a shoulder line up here that we can use as a reference, and we'll probably just go down, let's have a look how much space we've got. We'll go down 3 millimeters from there. So a little mark, and then join that mark up with the shoulder line. And then I tend to go back to these lines using the sander, but you can do it with a shooting board, a chisel, or, you know, all sorts of ways of just cutting a small angle on the top of a piece of wood, isn't there? Right, there we go. One traditionally constructed drawer complete without the base, but you know, that's the overall process of marking everything out, cutting stuff, fitting it. There's a lot going on in here, so don't worry if it's a bit like mind-blowing when you're trying to do it all, because yeah, it's a complicated process. But if you break it down, just remember that it's a series of very, very small steps. You've done a lap dovetail by this point in the cabinet. You've already done through dovetails if you've done the dovetail box project. There's just a few weird things with regards to the layout, watching out for the groove, and then after you've done that, you're all dandy pretty much. And what I would like to reiterate once again is if this was a little bit too fast for you, you didn't get enough detail for it, or you want a little bit more explanation, I have done tons of videos before this explaining how to do lap dovetails, through dovetails, how to cut pins, how to cut tails, how to mark out dovetail joints, all in individual videos. So if there's any tiny part you need revision on, and it'll all be linked in the supporting resources below this video. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.